Most people assume financial literacy begins with complicated knowledge about investing, stock markets, and economic systems. But in reality, the people who become financially literate rarely start with complex strategies or advanced theory, and instead they begin by building a few small habits that slowly change the way they observe money in their everyday lives. The surprising part is that these habits are usually simple, sometimes almost unremarkable, yet when repeated consistently over months and years, they gradually reshape how someone understands spending, saving, investing, and long-term financial decisions. Many people wait until they earn more money before thinking seriously about their finances, but financial literacy rarely begins with income and almost always begins with awareness. The moment you start paying closer attention to how money actually moves through your life, your perspective begins to shift and many financial decisions start feeling different. I'm Alex, and in this video, we're going to break down 8 tiny habits that can make you financially literate in 2026. And one of these habits can completely change the way you look at money within just a few weeks, so stay with me. The first habit is tracking where your money actually goes, because many people believe they understand their finances simply because they know roughly how much they earn and roughly how much they spend every month. Yet when someone tracks every single purchase for the first time, the results are often much more revealing than expected. Small purchases that once felt insignificant suddenly appear everywhere. Subscriptions that were barely noticed continue quietly in the background, and certain categories of spending turn out to be far larger than people originally assumed. Financial literacy often begins at the moment when guessing stops and observation begins, because when numbers become visible, patterns quickly emerge that were previously impossible to see. You begin recognizing which spending decisions actually shape your financial life and which purchases barely matter over the long run. And that simple awareness often changes future spending behavior without requiring strict rules or complicated budgeting systems. But once you begin observing where your money goes, another shift usually follows. The second habit is checking your financial accounts regularly, not only when something unusual happens, but as a simple routine that keeps you connected to your financial situation. Many people avoid looking at their accounts unless they need to pay bills, make a large purchase, or deal with financial stress, which means they interact with their finances only when something feels urgent. Financially literate people often do the opposite and check their accounts frequently simply to remain familiar with how their finances behave throughout the month. Over time, this habit builds familiarity with the natural rhythm of your financial life, including when bills arrive, how spending patterns shift depending on routines, and how quickly money can move when attention disappears. This awareness gradually builds confidence because money becomes something you observe regularly instead of something that feels unpredictable. Confidence with money is one of the most important foundations of financial literacy. However, awareness alone does not fully explain how people become financially literate, because once someone begins paying closer attention to their finances, another realization tends to appear. The third habit is learning the difference between assets and expenses, which may sound simple, but is one of the most important mental shifts in personal finance. Most people naturally focus on income because earning more money feels like the clearest form of financial progress, but financially literate individuals tend to focus more on what their money becomes after it is earned. An asset is something that can grow in value or generate income over time, while an expense is something that disappears once the money is spent. Understanding this difference may sound basic, yet it quietly changes how people evaluate financial decisions. Imagine 2 people receiving the same salary increase during the same year. One person immediately upgrades their lifestyle by moving into a slightly nicer apartment, purchasing new items, and increasing monthly spending. The other person chooses to direct a portion of that income increase towards savings or investments. At first, the difference between these 2 choices may appear relatively small, but over several years, the outcomes can become dramatically different because assets slowly grow and begin working in the background, while expenses simply repeat every month without creating long-term value. Once people begin thinking about money through this lens, many financial priorities start shifting naturally. But there is another tiny habit that accelerates this learning process. The fourth habit is spending a small amount of time each day learning about money, because financial literacy grows much more through consistent exposure to ideas than through occasional intense study. This does not require reading complicated textbooks or analyzing financial markets for hours. Instead, it simply means exposing yourself regularly to thoughtful financial information through articles, podcasts, or videos that explain financial concepts clearly. 10 or 15 minutes a day may not feel important in the moment, but over weeks and months, those ideas slowly begin connecting with each other. Concepts that once seemed confusing gradually become familiar, and words like inflation, compounding, diversification, and opportunity cost begin to make sense. Financial literacy often grows through repeated exposure rather than through sudden breakthroughs. But as your understanding expands, something else begins to change. Your sense of time begins shifting. And that shift leads directly to the fifth habit. The fifth habit is thinking about money in longer time horizons, which is one of the most powerful mindset changes in personal finance. Many financial decisions feel urgent because people naturally think in short cycles, such as the next paycheck, the next bill, or the next rent payment. Financially literate people often learn to zoom out and evaluate decisions across much longer periods of time. Instead of asking what a decision means this month, they ask what it might mean 5 or even 10 years from now. This small change in perspective transforms how financial choices feel. Short-term setbacks appear less dramatic, while small positive habits suddenly become far more valuable. Long-term thinking also helps people understand the real power of compounding. Compounding rarely looks impressive in the beginning because progress appears slow during the early years. But when time is allowed to work, the curve begins accelerating in ways that surprise most people. Once someone starts thinking about financial decisions through a longer time horizon, their priorities often begin shifting naturally. However, there is another small habit that helps protect those priorities. The sixth habit is pausing before making financial decisions, which introduces a moment of reflection into modern spending behavior. Today, it has become incredibly easy to spend money quickly. A few taps on a phone can complete a purchase within seconds. Subscriptions activate instantly, and online shopping removes most of the friction that once slowed spending. Financially literate people often introduce a small pause before completing purchases. Before buying something, they briefly ask whether the purchase reflects something they truly value or whether it is simply an impulse. Sometimes the answer will still be yes, and that is completely reasonable. But the pause itself creates awareness that separates intentional spending from automatic spending. Over time, this habit quietly reduces unnecessary purchases without requiring strict budgeting rules. But financial literacy is not only about personal spending behavior, it also requires understanding the environment in which money exists. And that leads to the seventh habit. The seventh habit is paying attention to economic signals, which helps people understand how the broader economy influences everyday financial life. This does not mean trying to predict markets or constantly following financial news. Instead, it means noticing how larger economic forces shape daily experiences. Inflation influences the cost of housing, groceries, and transportation. Interest rates influence mortgages, loans, and borrowing costs. Economic cycles influence job markets, wage growth, and investment opportunities. Financially literate people gradually become aware of these connections and begin understanding that personal finance does not operate in isolation. Recognizing this relationship helps people interpret financial changes more clearly and adapt more effectively when conditions shift. But there is one final habit that ties everything together. The eighth habit is talking about money openly and thoughtfully, which expands financial understanding through conversation and shared experiences. Many people grow up in environments where money is rarely discussed openly. Finances often become a private topic that people feel uncomfortable bringing into conversation. However, avoiding the subject can also limit learning. Financially literate people tend to approach money differently. They ask questions, discuss ideas, and share experiences with friends, mentors, or colleagues. These conversations often reveal perspectives that would be difficult to discover alone. Someone might explain how they structure their investments. Another person might share lessons learned from financial mistakes earlier in life. Over time, these discussions broaden your understanding of how different people approach money. When you step back and look at these 8 habits together, something interesting becomes clear. None of them require extraordinary discipline or advanced financial knowledge. Most of them take only a few minutes a day. Yet together, they slowly transform how you understand money and financial decision-making. Tracking spending builds awareness, checking accounts builds familiarity, understanding assets reshapes priorities, learning regularly expands knowledge, and thinking long-term changes the way decisions feel. Pausing before purchases improves spending habits, watching economic signals builds context, and discussing money strengthens understanding through shared ideas. Financial literacy rarely arrives all at once. Instead, it grows gradually through curiosity, awareness, and small daily habits repeated consistently over long periods of time. People who eventually become financially literate are not necessarily the smartest or the most disciplined individuals. They simply built routines that kept them paying attention to how money actually works. And over time, that attention slowly turns into understanding that shapes their financial decisions for the rest of their lives. Subscribe for more.